What's going on, everyone? This is ryandrew, and I'm back here again with another Sable brush inking demo of an illustration by Jack Kirby of Iron Man. This is the 1960s red-yellow Iron Man costume that's pretty classic that we think about the old comic version of Iron Man. I really like the posing, the strong dynamic pose that Iron Man has here as he's getting ready to throw a giant boulder on somebody. So these are the final inks, and let's go ahead and get started, and I'll show you how I started this. So again, I'm using Speedball Super Black India ink here. It's really reliable, gives a good nice black. It's pretty trusty, holds up pretty well. I love using this ink, so we're gonna go ahead and keep going with that. I'm also using a Winsor Newton Series 7 Sable brush, Kolinsky Sable brush. This is size 1 because I'm working at a size that's 8.5 by 11, so it's easier for me to get some variation here. And I also like to have a little piece of Bristol board where I use it as like a test strip where I'm gonna taper the brush point here, get the excess ink off the brush, and get a nice fine point. I've also got a little jar of water here that I can clean the brush off as I need to. Again, very important point, guys, don't get ink all the way up into the brush, the metal part. It will tear down your brush over time, so just try to get it like halfway full if you can. And again, I'm using 8.5 by 11 cardstock that fits to the printer. I printed this drawing of Iron Man onto the cardstock through the printer, and whatever brand I'm using, it's like Avery or I don't know what the brand is. It tends to work pretty well as I print out the lightened pencil, quote-unquote, image here of Iron Man. This has been a good experience doing it this way. Printed out 8.5 by 11 cardstock, probably 110 pound or so. It holds up pretty well. Okay, I'm just going to make sure that I've got the image in frame of the camera as best as possible before I start inking. And you can also use something like painter's tape, or you can see here I'm using these little dots by Stapler just to keep the image on the artboard without it slipping around too much as I'm inking. You can use painter's tape, something that's got like low tack so it's not going to rip the paper up. All right, I'm starting top left again, and I've sped this up just for the purpose of the video, but you want to see that I am trying to get a very good, consistent contour line without going too far away from Jack Kirby's pencils. I'm trying to be very faithful with inking his pencils. Also, you can see I'm really trying to focus on the line weight variation so that I'm just being very effective with the line weight in trying to convey the shape of the image, the hand, or whatever with thicker and thin lines as necessary. It's really easy when you're inking with a brush to mash down too hard without noticing it, and you really put down a lot of ink. So you want to be very careful and deliberate with your lines so that the very thin parts are thin, you're not spitting out too much ink there, and you're really getting a nice line without it being very blobby and thick when it doesn't need to. You really want to try to draw or ink with your elbow or shoulder, as they say, to get a nice variation of line and a nice motion of line there. So that's my goal with these. I try to do the contour, and I try to just follow that principle of making really good lines with my elbow or with my shoulder. So the basic principles here is you're using thicker lines on the bottom side or the underside of the object to show like where the light source, where the shadows are going to be, where it's going to be facing away from the light source, and then the closer to the light source you're going to have thinner lines. That really helps to sell like the three-dimensional aspect of the image of the drawing. Jack Kirby is a very dynamic penciler, so he plots out exactly where his light source is going to be and how thick those lines are going to be. So I'm just really trying to follow that up here best as I can, and this is part of the learning process for me. So this is the 1960s version of Iron Man, so the red-yellow costume, very simple, classic helmet shape and everything else. I really like it. It's really chunky. It's very machine, metallic, like 1960s version of Iron Man that is very recognizable to a lot of people when you think of Iron Man. This is probably my favorite version of him. I know the movie versions of Iron Man are pretty cool and all the gadgets and everything, but I just really like the simplified design that Kirby had with this design of Iron Man. Another thing to point out too is, again, you want to think of your 2D drawings as three-dimensional, so he penciled this. The lines are following the curvature of the hand. That really helps to sell that three-dimensional aspect of his hand there. So I'm following that when I ink this in. It's got that curve around the fingers. And especially on his cuffs here, on his arms, this is the metal part of his costume that's got that reflection to it. So I'm really trying to just follow those curves as much as possible, as best as possible, and fill in some of this metallic looking effect that he gives here. I really like how he also rendered this giant boulder type thing and just given it these pockets of shadow. Gives it a very solid mass with a lot of interest and variation in the different shapes here and that are in shadow, in contrast to Iron Man's costume. It's really cool juxtaposition of like dark giant black areas of ink mixed with the just very straight metallic looking lines on Iron Man's costume. I know that I'm going to be coming back in here and filling in those areas with inks. So for now, I'll just mark it. You can mark it with an X or just a dot to let me know that I'm going to come back in here and fill it in with ink completely. And just back to the banding on the costume on his arms and everything, just showing that curvature of the material. And again, here's the classic Kirby squiggles of like the shadow and just showing like a metallic object and how it reflects and bounces the light off. It's really cool. Kirby really gets away with a lot of detail by just suggesting the sinews or the muscle mass with those squiggles. That's become known as his iconic style, and it's really fun to ink those areas on any drawing that he's done, really. Just those nice, quick lines that are showing you the muscle sinew, the muscle mass there. Again, I've sped this up probably about 5 times speed, but here I'm really trying to follow the form and the shape of this costume because that's what's really selling this pose, is his body just stretching there and just making sure the lines are wrapping correctly and are following that consistent angle of Iron Man, and just using like the black areas and the dark and the thicker lines to show that stretch and that motion as he's moving there. I don't use a lot of feathering when I ink. I know different inkers use that style or they have that style. I don't really think there's a lot of it, I guess, in Jack Kirby's artwork when they inked his art, different inkers. There were certainly guys that had more of a feathery style. I really don't have that style. So for these, where it's just very bold and very strong poses, I tend to just kind of follow the pencils as much as possible and just use those very solid shapes of black there. And again, I really try to just get a very nice, solid, flowing line as much as possible if I'm trying to connect like that quad down to his left knee. I really try to make that one flowing, sinuous line as much as possible. I really think that it helps to sell the movement and the motion of the pose, opposed to using very scratchy, jittery lines when I ink. And yeah, what is this? Are these like metallic pants that he's got on here? Metallic shorts on top of his metallic suit? I don't know. It's hard to tell. It's just coming out of his head, Jack Kirby's head, and just trying to sell the metallic sheen here of the material through these little spots of ink with a spacing between, I guess, is the goal. So just following that here. All right, time to fill in these areas of shadow on the giant rock, working left to right so I don't drag my hand through the ink. It just dries a lot faster. And it's really easy with a brush. You can just mash in those heavy areas as quick as possible, but you do have to be very careful when you get close to the areas that you've left to be in white, or the other parts of the image, like the costume and everything. Just be very careful with a point, go pretty carefully around those, and try not to go past what you've already laid down for lines. But yeah, it's really cool where you can just lay in the heavy areas once you're done with that. Another thing to note about this image is note how all the heavy areas of black ink are like in the rock on the underside and also here on his arm. And there's a technique that comic artists use, I guess they call it, or I don't know if they call it this, but spotting black. So you're using areas of black to draw the eye. And you can see here that these large areas of black ink are kind of framing in Iron Man's face. You can tell that his face there, the helmet, is not in shadow. It's not rendered very dark or anything like that. There's some little areas of definition, but for the most part, his face or his mask is pretty clear because you want to see his expression. You want to see Iron Man's face as much as possible there in the image. So you'll see, like, once you see the final image, there's all these areas of black ink around his costume and the rock and everything else, except for his mask that kind of draws your eye to his face as much as possible. And I really love Jack Kirby, how he draws feet. He really doesn't get too precious or hung up on the rendering of them, how accurate they are. He just kind of goes for it and gives his characters these like pretty chunky, dynamic looking feet here. So I like that shape here on Iron Man's foot. And one of the reasons why Jack Kirby's images, his illustrations, look very dynamic anyways is because he is forcing the perspective a lot of times, where you can see here in Iron Man's right foot stepping into the foreground. It's almost like it's bursting out of the image here because he's forced the perspective, made his right foot look so much larger than his left foot in the background there that it looks like he's basically, you know, just kind of like leaping out of the page. Maybe he was picking up on some cues from like Renaissance painters and sculptors and stuff when they would do that with their statues, the hands on their statues, the feet and everything. But that's a really good technique to make your characters or your heroes appear more imposing by just making them, you know, like their hands or their feet appear to be bigger, like it's coming at you, it's like larger than life and stepping out of the page. So it's a pretty effective technique that he used a lot. That's why a lot of his images look very dynamic like that. And for this last part, just a really faint outline of some landscape area here so you can see that Iron Man's out here in the desert or the wilderness just getting ready to throw some giant boulder at a bad guy or something. All you need is a really simple detail, and you don't need to do too much when you've got a really strong image like this. and I'll just finish up by throwing my signature on here after Jack Kirby. I really tried to stick pretty close to his pencils and not go too far off into the weeds inking in my style or anything like that. I just really tried to just follow what he put down here. And there you go, guys, final illustration. And you can just see here that pose I was talking about, that really strong triangular pose of his legs, and then the point reached at the top there with his left arm just stretching out above the rock. Really gives a lot of strength and weight to Iron Man here as he's getting ready to throw this giant boulder on a villain or something. And you can see the different techniques I was talking about here, just line weight, variation, showing the light source and the shadows versus the light areas, and just using the force perspective on his feet and everything to just show that motion and that movement coming out of the page, as well as wrapping those lines around the form to indicate that three-dimensional aspect of the character. So there you go, very great illustration by Jack Kirby, really fun to ink. So another one done, and on to the next one, right? So that's it. Thank you everybody for watching again. Appreciate it so much. Hope you guys enjoyed this and are learning to ink like I am. Go ahead and check out the other videos I have on the channel, the other inking videos. Check out my other stuff. Like, subscribe if you would. And again, until next time, everybody, thank you so much and God bless.